Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We are rejoining our crew of the Artemis on the Tremonia Station restoration project as they make their trip on out to the moon. Now, we are going to try to set up a little node right out here near Periapsis to kind of adjust our approaching inclination a little bit as soon as KSP actually lets me move some node things around. But yeah, we'd like to eliminate as much of this inclination difference as we can before we make our SOI change. It's a whole lot cheaper way the hell out here, and if we can get that descending node and periapsis to line up, then I think we'll just be much better off, generally speaking. So it's about 11.2 meters per second in something like 22 hours or whatnot, and then we'll just fly right past it by about half an hour. But you know, it's mostly a rookie crew. Doug Hastings doing all the driving, Mike Sinkovich and Dmitry, last name I'm just not going to try to pronounce. And a smart person would have put thrusters on our transferable payload, I guess our orbital toolbox, plus our sebator things, our water purifiers. Anyway, we will go ahead and light the main engine. It's probably a good idea to make sure that it works before we have to make our orbital insertion, and if it fails, get ejected out into the solar system. So a little bit shy of what we were actually intending to do. That's not a big problem. What we are going to start doing is pumping these fuel tanks into our main tank. This is primarily for thruster balance. It'll make it a little easier if the majority of our mass is near where the thrusters are. So we are coming up here on orbital insertion, and the gimbal on our service propulsion system is a little wonky, but I don't know, I guess nothing new there. We've seen that problem before. We're just going to go ahead and get ourselves about faced. It's a 301.2 meter per second burn to put ourselves into a highly eccentric orbit here at the moon, which we will use to correct the rest of our inclination difference out at the top. And there's Earthrise. I wish the crew could see that. That is absolutely stunning. The burn is going to take just right around 5 minutes, so we were a little late getting it going. Not that that's anything new or surprising, really. It shouldn't give us too much of a problem as far as I don't know, being able to eliminate our relative inclination later on. It just means the crew's probably going to be parked here for a while. At least they have that docking hub adapter thing, and that KIS container is passable, so they do have some room to like up and move around and go do stuff. And there is our angle change telling us that we are in fact in orbit, and it's about an 11-degree difference, so we'll go ahead and plot our node to take care of that. 22 meters per second. And these two fuel tanks were draining unevenly, so we'll fill them both back up and then drain them back into our primary. The little orange tank there at the bottom is locked and will remain so. That is our get home free fuel. As long as we have fuel in that thing, we should have no problem breaking lunar orbit and being able to return to Earth safely. So anything else beyond that fuel tank is just an accessory at this point, although we do have plans to make some changes to Tremonia Station's orbit once we have a few minor repairs out there accomplished. So there's our main engine ignition, bringing our relative inclination down to about 2 degrees. We're going to try to correct more of this on the back of RCS with the aid of a little bit of physics warp, because it just makes things so much easier when it comes down to this stuff. And about 0.05 is the lowest we're going to see, considering how badly I mucked up that node. And we're going to set a maneuver to naturalize our orbit with Tremonia Station, and then we'll probably jump through it a little bit, or take a bunch of low orbit lunar passes to wait until we have an actual rendezvous with some chunks of Tremonia Station drifting listlessly here in lunar orbit. So it's 620 meters per second to bring our orbit down to something a little more reasonable. Um, Par for the course, I suppose. It seems a bit expensive considering a normal 2 orbit insertions about 1 kilometer per second. We're sitting at right around 900 something, so I guess not, now that I do the math in my head. Everything seems fine. Doug Hastings, your driving is just fine, turns out. Anyway, so we are just a little short on this burn, it looks like, from being able to look at this window now in post, but our relative inclination having shifted just a little bit. It's still well within threshold. I mean, really anything less than a quarter of a degree is really, really, really easy to compensate for upon rendezvous. So we're just going to go ahead and run with it, and it is starting to fall again. So I think it's the before node and then after node changes in delta V will always cause a shift there, so it should bring itself back down to about 0.05 by the time we complete this burn, although I might be shutting the engine down just a little bit early so that we can, I don't know, we want to have our orbit speed offset, because as you can see there's a pretty big gap there to where we're going to have to let the station bits catch up with us, or so that we can go catch up with the station. Oh, turns out I was doing a little better than I'd hoped for, a relative inclination down to 0.01. Hey, look at me go. That was entirely unintentional. So there is our engine shutdown with about 0.5 meter per second left to go. And then I realize, do I have the correct thing selected? That's what our current target is. So we should probably jump out here and take a look. Yeah. Nope, this is our fuel tank in Lunar Uber 2. So we have the wrong target picked. As we'll take a look at this one. This is our habitat module with some crates. Might have some useful stuff in it, but not what we are looking for currently. So a little bit of renaming, and then we'll just jump out to our next target. And there it is, Skylab module. This is our primary target, or our first target, I should say, in this run. So we will give it a unique name so that we can know what we're aiming for, and then go ahead and jump back to Artemis so that we can adjust our course, adjust our targeting. Of course, priority number 1 being let's move some fuel around, and then we will reset our target, check our distances, and it looks like we're going to be parked here for quite a while. So focus view on the moon, and then do some time warping. And it looks like they're going to be spending about a couple of weeks in here, just taking stock of things and waiting for their rendezvous target, or their closest distance at closest approach, to come way the hell down as we wait for them to be in alignment. But they're getting the experience in, and there it is. It looks like it's going to be a very small correction, although I wish I'd come out of time warp a little bit sooner. Probably would have been a little easier to correct for all of this silliness. But there it is. It is not a very large correction. Obviously, we're just about 7.5 meters per second, 7 something. But we'll go ahead and light the engine just so we can get it done as quickly as possible, because we're going to spend a lot of time just sitting here on the thrusters. Of course, our rookie pilot can't hold target relative or even a maneuver node. So we're just going to stay in the direction where we were and kind of bounce on the thrusters. Thankfully, there's just not a whole lot of correction that needs to be done. We're already down below 2 kilometers, so just a little bouncing between keys or so. We should be able to work that number down slowly while fighting the, I don't know, pitch and wobble of a horribly unbalanced spacecraft, because I forgot to put thrusters on the payload. But we've got our distance down to about 82 meters. We'll tell Mech Jeb to set up the burn for match velocities. That's about 10.6 meters per second as we wait for Kerbal Space Program to catch up with us. There it is. Oops, we are absolutely not in position. Rookie crew once again. So we will light our service propulsion system. That thing has like 36 ignitions to start with, so I'm really not too concerned on using too many of them. We can get home on exactly 1. So we've got lots and lots and lots of room to work with. We're still heading away at about 0.5 meter per second, so we'll just naturalize that on the back of RCS, and then just go ahead and keep accelerating inward. There are there's one docking port on the side, but it does not match the docking port at the nose of our cargo. We have to make some changes. Really, there's going to be a multi-step process to this first leg of the mission, and it is going to be clearing out the tank that is attached to the bottom of the Skylab module and attaching in its place a docking port that will be CLS compliant. This is just for station keeping. A little bit of time warp, you see the Skylab module bounce away and then magically bounce back as we just I get impatient and want to correct things out and get a lot of this done just as quickly as possible. So we're going to try to normalize our approach. I would like to come in on this blank side because our very first step is going to be attaching a docking port there to the side so that we can have something to attach to, move some resources around, kind of lighten our load a little bit, and also give our engineer a little bit of room to work with as far as just being able to jump out, detach some things, come back, grab the docking port, and then lock it onto where it's supposed to be on the bottom anyway. So the very first step of that is going to be pulling the spacecraft close enough to where we can attach one of these docking ports to the side without having to actually dock the two spacecraft together. It sounds a little convoluted, I know, but I would absolutely love to have a nice fixed point or make these two spacecraft join before we start doing the bulk of the repairs here. And so that is the first step. So, looks like a little bit of a nudge thanks to my lack of depth perception, but we'll just go ahead and try to pull ourselves in around here. There's our EVA, Mike Sinkovich. Time to get to work. If you could just grab this docking port and then drift in the correct direction. Yep, nope, didn't work that time. So we'll make another attempt. Grab and drift. Just attach it anywhere. Nope, we missed. Oh, these rookies. They're ever so green. And Skylab is spinning in a rather unnatural fashion. That time you couldn't even grab it. So we'll come back, we'll jump again, and then bang. Got it. On the completely wrong side. But at least it's here, and it's going to be a whole lot easier to work with to get it onto the correct side now that we're not carrying things across an open distance. So after just kind of haphazardly riveting it down wherever he feels like he can, we'll get it into a much better position. And honestly, I'm ready to call that a day. So we'll try to get this thing under control by getting a Kerbal into it. There we can finally use just the time warp cheat to get things leveled out there. And we'll set our new docking port as target. Control from here to make sure that we're getting our alignment as well as we can. And now begins the super painstaking process of docking one unbalanced spacecraft to one that has absolutely no control. I don't know if there's actually any avionics included in the cupola module. If there is, we're probably way over them. That Skylab module is like 32 tons all by itself, and then it is loaded up with life support and fuel and all the other things. Probably a lot of living amenities as we had to evacuate the station in a very, very quickly. That was not our intention, but we'll start to get our target set and try to keep the spacecraft from wiggling around too much. Really, this is the part where I start kicking myself a lot harder for forgetting the thrusters on the payload there. It would have made things so much easier to be able to balance this out, but I think we actually do have it as empty as we can. We're just going to try to rotate it in a little bit and maybe get this alignment a little bit more natural, but of course trying to translate side to side gives us a nice pivot, which causes a little bit of a nudge, and now we're kind of off center, but yeah, and then we're off to the side, and then we're off center. It's just a bad time all the way around, but eventually we'll get ourselves a couple of quick nudges in. We'll be off, and of course, yeah, translating to the side makes the angle worse. This was infuriating for me to do, as I'm sure it is as infuriating for all of you to watch. So we'll back off. We'll reduce the rotation of the station using time warp because, I don't know, tricking time somehow makes things stop rotating. Doesn't matter. Anyway, we'll just go ahead and start our approach off angle and then try to adjust the angle of it as we get in a little bit closer, hoping that maybe we can just kind of pivot into position a little more naturally this time. Yeah, no, not the thing. It also, yeah, it doesn't help when trying to translate side to side increases the angle that you're trying to decrease, but eventually, I promise you, we will have knocked enough paint off of this thing that we can actually gather a hard dock. And in case you're wondering, that bar running through the middle of the docking port is not what's creating any kind of latching problems. Not that we've really had a latching problem, but right there, without even me trying to like pay attention to stuff, we do have hard dock. So fantastic. Once again, it is time for our engineer, Mike Sinkovich, to jump outside. We're going to collect these struts because we lost a few last time around, and it's kind of become apparent that we're going to need them. Although this tank he's trying to deal with is empty, so he can actually pick that up if we get things a little wrong. So we'll just go ahead and knock this thing loose and get it out of the way. Detach. And kick it off to the side so that we can get it out of the way, and then grab a brick of plastique. And, you know, this is kind of weird. There's the cupola. How the hell? Yeah, well, anyway, we're going to set the explosives. We'll put about a minute on the timer, and then we'll just kick this thing free. Our cupola is still attached, so I guess we just have like a magic replicating cupola? It's just weird. Though, funnily enough, it does seem to be rotating as if the mass of that cupola is actually being taken into consideration. Not that it matters anymore. So I did just want to slow it down a little bit so we could appreciate that explosion before we actually get back to work. It's nice to know that C4 works really, really well. But as we're getting this docking port into position, I thought I would mention this is not the first time we've actually seen that cupola just magically replicate like that. A long time ago when we had the original Lunar Uber after something got messed up with the part routing thanks to Kerbal Attachment System. We went to go destroy it, and it actually brought a copy of the cupola with it also, which threw off its balance and made it so that it couldn't deorbit itself, so we just had to detonate that in orbit also. Docking port is placed on the node to be Kerbal or Connected Living Space compliant. Sorry, and we've got 4 struts lined up there so that we can reinforce the rest of our cargo when we should get it docked. So we will pump a bunch of fuel from Artemis into our Skylab module that will just kind of help lighten the load and make things a little easier to manage, I'm hoping, because now we need to move this payload down to that docking port that we just installed. It does need to fit in between Skylab and the very large fuel tank that we have. That is also going to be the propulsion system that we're going to use for our orbital correction maneuvers, since it does have a tug attached to it. It's powered by 5 AJ-10 Advanced, the 118K variant, so unlimited ignitions, etc., etc. Lots of thrusters, hopefully nicely well balanced, etc. And that fuel tank has a whole lot of fuel in it, so it behooves us to take it with us, as it does have a couple of refuels worth for both Nemo and or Dory, and the Lunar Uber 2, which is currently docked to the same piece of hardware that our fuel tank is. So I'm still trying to work out the logistics of how exactly we are going to connect all of these things together. I would like to bring the Lunar Uber 2 with us also, although it might throw off our weight balance. We're going to have to take stock of what there is and how much of it we've got, and see if we can do this all in one trip, or if it might just be better to move things over to the new orbit bit by bit, which quite honestly I'm not exactly excited about the prospect of doing, but We'll have to see how the rest of this whole thing comes together. Of course, we do always have the option of being able to relocate some docking ports to more advantageous locations. The nice thing about that big fuel tank that we're going to be dragging along is it has 4 additional docking ports. They are intended for resupply pods to dock to. They do all have the Apollo docking port. Until very recently, that was absolutely our standard. It just turns out that the APAS docking system, it's a little larger, and it's much more rigid than the Apollo docking system. So as far as station construction goes, we may be switching over to that as far as a new standard. Although since we have so many vehicles in the field that use the Apollo docking port, we may be relying on that for crew deployment. Things that don't have to be load bearing per se. Doing stuff like this is not exactly common for our space program, although yes, it absolutely does happen enough to warrant it, but we'll have to see. The APAS system is also a whole lot lighter than the Apollo docking port, which is interesting. I guess not. As technology advances, of course it's going to get lighter, even though it's larger and more rigid. So maybe I shouldn't be surprised by all of that. But anyway, we are making like our 10th approach to this docking port, and I'm honestly a little frustrated, but we'll just turn off SAS and ta-da, hard dock! Hooray! So now that our intermediate adapter is in place and locked, we can go ahead and transfer some fuel back into those satellite reserve pods, since the Skylab module itself is entirely full, and then we're going to go ahead and move Artemis out of the way. And this is finally the only well-balanced docking to happen this entire episode. I know there's been like, gosh, so many stupid dockings, but it needs to be done. And I will probably have to go back and move those KAS struts so that we can span around the intermediate module there, the payload as I've been referring to it up until this point of the episode. And turned in a little too fast, nudged some new paint, and I didn't realize I had the lights turned on, but that is definitely a light coming directly from our docking port, which is, man, never noticed that before, but super handy. Now I know we're pointing at the docking port without looking at the nav ball, which is an entirely redundant queue system. Anyway, we're balanced at least, but Skylab was spinning a little bit, and there it is, hard dock. Finally. So this is our temporary configuration until we can bring over the fuel tank. That will be the next step in this process. But since we're here, we might as well research some of this data that we've got sitting around. So we'll get our scientist in there to start working on things. I'm sure he's absolutely ecstatic about that massive space inside that Skylab module. And we'll just have a quick look at the Earth here in orbit of the moon. That's going to do it for this one, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really appreciate it. And I'll see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.